I'm going to give you a talk today called Do Your Own Research, Searching for Information About Misinformation Increases Belief in It. And there were a lot of people who contributed to this, but I want to point out in particular Kevin Aslett, who is the lead author on this paper, who's a postdoc at the Center for Social Media and Politics. When we think about the misinformation ecosystem, there's a lot of different ways we can sort of cut into this. And one of them has to do a lot of focus is on sharing. But we're going to focus on in this particular paper, and what I'm going to show you here today is this link between exposure and belief. So if you are exposed to fake news, if you're exposed to news that's false, do you believe that it's true? And people are tremendously concerned about this, and there is lots of research and work going on in both academia, in civil society, about trying to think about how do we prevent people from believing misinformation. And one of the things that ends up being brought out over and over again is that if you are advising people that if you encounter some news that you think might be false, you should actually go look and see if you can find other information about it so you can try to educate yourself in this regard, which sounds like a great idea. We not only do this just in general about news, but we see this about health misinformation in particular. If you see health misinformation, go out and see if you can find some other information about it. The problem is that when people go to search for more information online, they're doing this through search engines. And we don't really talk about search engines as much in the misinformation world as we do about other sources of information. But it turns out that more than 50% of internet users state they check facts they come across at least once a day. And internet users, it turns out, trust search engines more than traditional news, such as radio, newspaper, or television. The problem with search engines, though, is a phrase coined by a frequent attender here at Social Science Foo, Dana Boyd, had this concept of data voids. And data voids was this issue about if you have people going and looking for information about topics on which there is a sort of ecosystem around false information, but this hasn't bubbled up enough for the mainstream to be correcting it and talking about how these might be wrong, people can go searching for information about topics that are incorrect, and they find more information about topics that are incorrect. So we worry about if you tell people to go out and look for information, what's going to happen when people go out and look for information? So with this question in mind, we designed 4 studies at the Center for Social Media and Politics trying to test the effect of searching for information on belief in misinformation. We only have 5 minutes here, so I'll very quickly show you the results together, but I want to emphasize the point here. These are 4 different types of study. We looked at directly after misinformation is published, and we looked at what was the difference between people who we asked to search for information and those we didn't. We also tested within people, within individuals, within respondents, where we would ask people whether they thought a story was true or not, and then ask them to go out and look. And then after they've gone out to the internet, look and see if it was true or not. We did this months after publication, and we also did this with strictly COVID-19 information. All right, so how do we run these studies? This is part of a much larger project we've been running at the Center for Social Media and Politics, where we try to develop a way to understand the way most people encounter news, which is when news is recently published, what people's ability to identify the veracity of news. So we built 5 news streams, 2 mainstream news streams, one from left-leaning and one from right-leaning, and 3 that were composed of suspect news sources, left-leaning, right-leaning, we couldn't tell. And every morning we would send out the most popular story from those news streams to a large crowd of people, as well as to professional fact checkers. And the crowd of people here is where I'm going to get to the experimental data from here, and the professional fact checkers are what we're going to use for ground truth. This is the kicker of the whole thing, which is that what we found was that far from helping people to better discern that fake news was fake or false news stories were false, regardless of the way we set these studies up, and these were 4 different studies, we found these remarkably consistent effects. Searching for information online about false news stories made people about 20% more likely to believe those stories than not searching for false information. Now that leads to the question of the mechanism, right? And what we have tried to zero in on is picking up on Dana Boyd's, this idea of data voids, which has to do with information quality. We built a search engine, we built a tracker so we could track people and see where they went. The browser saved their browser results. And what we found is that for any of these false news stories, there certainly is much more low quality information that's returned. And what we found is that our results were being driven by the cases where people were getting low quality news back while they were searching on the information. We see this here if we break it up into no news versus only reliable news, or some very reliable news. We break it up here if we look at the amount of low quality news that's returned. So the takeaway is searching for information about false stories increases belief in misinformation. And we think that the reason this is happening is because belief in misinformation correlates with the reliability of search engine results returned, which suggests partially consistent evidence in support of this data voids theory. So thank you very much.